It is 8:15 in the morning on August 6th, 1945. 31,000 feet above the Japanese city of Hiroshima, a bomb falls. It takes 44.4 seconds to reach its detonation altitude. In those 44.4 seconds, the city below is waking up normally. A pastor named Kiyoshi Tanimoto is moving furniture in a suburb 2 miles from the center. Children are eating breakfast. A tram is running on its regular schedule. Soldiers are doing morning drills. A school is opening its doors. At 8:15 and plus 17 seconds, a fireball appears above the city, with a temperature of 7,000 degrees Celsius. In the first second, everything within 500 meters of the hypocenter simply ceases to exist. In the first minute, 80,000 people are dead. 70% of every building in Hiroshima has been destroyed. The tram that was running on its schedule is vaporized. The children eating breakfast are gone. The school that was opening its doors is ash. 6 miles above the destruction, the man who dropped the bomb banks the aircraft sharply to outrun the shockwave and watches the mushroom cloud rise 3 miles into the sky. His co-pilot pounds him on the shoulder. "Look at that. Look at that. Look at that." Paul Tibbets does not say anything. He turns the Enola Gay back toward Tinian Island. 6 hours home, breakfast waiting, a medal waiting. Paul Tibbets lived for 62 years after Hiroshima. He never apologized. Not once. Not privately. Not on his deathbed. And before he died, he gave one final instruction. No funeral. No headstone. No grave. Not because he was ashamed, but because he knew exactly what would happen. To a marked grave with his name on it. By the end of this video, you will understand why that instruction tells you more about Paul Tibbets than anything he ever said out loud. To understand what Paul Tibbets did on August 6, 1945, you first need to understand what kind of man was selected to do it, because the United States Army Air Force did not choose Paul Tibbets randomly. They chose him because he was, by the assessment of his commanding general Hap Arnold, the best pilot in the Army Air Force. Not one of the best. The best. Paul Warfield Tibbets Jr. was born in Quincy, Illinois, on February 23, 1915. His mother's name, the woman he would name the most famous aircraft in history after, was Enola Gay Haggard, a name so unusual that Tibbets wrote later that he used to dread introductions because people always asked him to repeat it. When he was 12 years old, his father hired a barnstormer named Doug Davis to fly over Hialeah Racetrack in Florida as a promotional stunt. Young Paul went up with Davis and they dropped Baby Ruth candy bars with tiny parachutes attached to the crowd below. That was the first thing Paul Tibbets ever dropped from an aircraft. Candy bars with parachutes. He said later that from that moment, that exact moment in the air above Florida, when he was 12 years old, he knew he had to fly, that nothing else would ever matter as much. His father, a believer in discipline, sent him to Western Military Academy, then pre-medical studies at Cincinnati in Florida. But Tibbets abandoned medicine. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1937. He had his wings within a year. By 1942, just 5 years after enlisting, Tibbets was a major, a squadron commander, flying B-17s out of England. Therefore, on August 17, 1942, Tibbets co-piloted the lead bomber in the very first American daylight raid on occupied Europe. Rouen, France, the beginning of the American Air War. He flew 43 combat missions out of England and North Africa. He flew General Mark Clark to Gibraltar for Operation Torch. He flew General Dwight Eisenhower to Gibraltar the night of the North African invasion. By the time historian Stephen Ambrose reviewed his record, the same Stephen Ambrose who wrote Band of Brothers, he described Tibbets as, by reputation, the best flyer in the Army Air Force. And then in September 1947, a message arrived. Tibbets was summoned to a secret military conclave in Colorado Springs. He sat in a room with senior officers and scientists he had never met, and they told him that he had been selected out of every pilot in the United States Army Air Force to command a unit called the 509th Composite Group. They told him almost nothing about what the mission was, just that it would end the war, just that it required the best. My job, in brief, was to wage atomic war. Those were his words, written years later, not in regret, in the matter-of-fact tone of a man describing a professional assignment. For the next 11 months, Paul Tibbets lived a lie. Not a lie of cowardice, a lie of security. The 509th Composite Group was 1,800 men pilots, navigators, bombardiers, mechanics, support staff assembled at Wendover Air Force Base on the Nevada-Utah border, an air base so remote that Tibbets chose it specifically because nothing was near it, and therefore nothing could leak. Tibbets told his men almost nothing. He told them they were training for a mission of extraordinary importance. He told them the aircraft they were flying, specially reconfigured B-29 superfortresses, stripped of armor plating and guns, to make them light enough for the mission, were unlike any aircraft they had ever flown. He did not tell them what the mission was. He drove his men relentlessly. He weeded out anyone who talked too much, who asked too many questions, who showed signs of being unable to perform under pressure without knowing why. And he lived with the weight of knowing what they were training for while they did not. His first marriage was already in trouble before the 509th. The secrecy of the mission finished it. He could not tell his wife Lucy anything. Not where he was going, not what he was doing, not when he would be back. A marriage cannot survive one person knowing everything and the other knowing nothing. They divorced in 1955, but here is the thing nobody covers about the 11 months at Wendover. Tibbets was not training his men to drop a bomb. He was training them to survive dropping a bomb. The blast from an atomic weapon the scientists at Los Alamos had calculated would generate a shock wave powerful enough to destroy the aircraft that delivered it if the pilot did not take evasive action within seconds of release. Therefore, Tibbets spent months developing a specific maneuver, a diving turn at an angle of 155 degrees that would put enough distance between the aircraft and the blast in the 44 seconds between release and detonation to survive the shock wave. He practiced this turn. His crews practiced this turn over and over until it was reflex, until every man in the 509th could execute it without thinking. He was training them to drop a bomb that would destroy a city and then turn fast enough to still be alive to see it happen. In May 1945, the 509th transferred to Tinian Island in the South Pacific, 1,500 miles from Japan, the final staging ground, and on the morning of August 5, 1945, picked up a paintbrush and painted the name Enola Gay in block letters on the nose of aircraft number 44 to 86292, his mother's name. The courageous, red-haired mother whose quiet confidence had been a source of strength to me since boyhood. His words, not sentiment. The specific precision of a man choosing the name he wanted on the aircraft that was about to do what no aircraft had ever done in human history. At 2:45 in the morning on August 6, 1945, 3 B-29 superfortresses take off from Tinian Island in the darkness of the Pacific. The lead aircraft, the Enola Gay carrying Little Boy, uses more than 2 miles of runway to get airborne, because Little Boy weighs nearly 10,000 pounds. Before takeoff, Flight Surgeon Don Young handed Tibbets a small cardboard box. Inside, 12 cyanide capsules, one for each member of the crew, in case of emergency landing, in case of capture. Paul Tibbets put the box in his flight suit pocket and taxied to the runway. The crew of 12 did not know what they were carrying. They knew it was important. They knew it was secret. They knew they had trained for this moment for 11 months. And they trusted the man in the left seat because every man in the 509th trusted Tibbets. At 7:15 a.m. as the Enola Gay climbed to its bombing altitude of 31,000 feet, the weaponeer, Navy Captain William Parsons, armed the bomb in the unpressurized bomb bay. And at some point during those 6 hours in the air, Paul Tibbets broke radio silence. He gathered his crew on the interphone. "Fellows, you have just dropped the first atom bomb in history." That is what he said. Not, "We are about to." Not, "When we get there." You have just, future perfect, as if it was already done, as if in his mind it had already happened and they were simply flying toward the confirmation. The city of Hiroshima had been deliberately spared conventional bombing for months. The scientists needed a pristine target, an undamaged city, to measure exactly what an atomic bomb did to a city that had not already been destroyed. And at 8:15 a.m. Tibbets flew over the T-shaped Aioi Bridge in central Hiroshima, the aiming point selected months earlier, and bombardier Tom Farabee released Little Boy, 44.4 seconds. Tibbets executed the 155-degree diving turn he had practiced for 11 months. The aircraft dropped 1,700 feet in the maneuver. Then the shockwave hit. The Enola Gay lurched. Tail gunner Robert Caron, the only man facing backward, watched the fireball and the mushroom cloud rising and said, "It's like bubbling molasses. It's got a red core in it. Everything is burning inside." Tibbets turned back to look. The city was hidden by that awful cloud, boiling up, mushrooming, terrible, incredibly tall. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, he turned the Enola Gay back toward Tinian, 6 hours home. At 2:58 p.m. local time, they landed. General Carl Spaatz was waiting on the tarmac. He pinned the Distinguished Service Cross on Tibbets's flight suit before Tibbets had finished climbing out of the aircraft. The war was not yet over. That would take 3 more days and a second bomb on Nagasaki and the Soviet declaration of war against Japan, and even then Japan did not surrender immediately. But for Paul Tibbets, the mission was complete. He had done what he was selected to do. He had done it precisely. The bomb dropped at 8:15 a.m. plus 17 seconds. 17 seconds off schedule. "We weren't perfect," he said, at 83 years old, still calibrating against the standard. Here is what the world expected of Paul Tibbets. The world expected guilt. The world expected nightmares. The world expected a man slowly destroyed by the weight of what he carried, drinking himself to oblivion, unable to hold a job, unable to look people in the eye. The world expected the specific suffering that we assign to people who have done enormous harm, because the alternative, a man who does enormous harm and sleeps well, is something the world cannot easily accommodate. Paul Tibbets did not give the world what it expected. He left the military in 1966, brigadier general, after 29 years of service. He moved to Columbus, Ohio. He ran an aviation company. He remarried to Andrea Quattrehome in 1956. He had 3 sons. He went to Bob Evans for lunch, and when people found out who he was, when they found out that the ordinary old man in the plaid shirt with the hearing aids was the man who dropped the atomic bomb, they asked him if he regretted it. He always said no. "I didn't start the war," he said. "I didn't do anything except what I was told to do, what I had sworn to do, fight for the defense of this country." But in 1976, something happened that revealed more about Paul Tibbets than any interview ever did. At an air show in Texas, 31 years after Hiroshima, Tibbets reenacted the bombing run in a restored B-29, complete with a simulated mushroom cloud created by pyrotechnics on the ground. The Japanese government filed a formal protest. The United States government apologized to Japan. Paul Tibbets said he had not intended to insult the Japanese people. He did not apologize himself. Therefore, the question is not whether Paul Tibbets felt regret. The question is what he understood the word to mean. In 1995, the Smithsonian Institution mounted a 50th anniversary exhibition of the Enola Gay. The exhibition attempted to contextualize the bombing to show the Japanese casualties, the survivors, the aftermath, the moral debate that has never been resolved. Tibbets called it a damn big insult. He denounced the exhibition publicly. He said it focused too much on Japanese casualties and not enough on the brutality of the Japanese government and military. He was not wrong about the Japanese military. The Pacific War was characterized by atrocities on a scale the European theater rarely matched. The Bataan Death March, the Nanjing Massacre, the treatment of prisoners of war, the kamikaze pilots, the military's planning confirmed by intelligence intercepts to execute all American prisoners in the event of an Allied invasion. Tibbets had studied those intercepts. He knew what the invasion of Japan was projected to cost, between 400,000 and 800,000 American dead, and millions of Japanese. He believed and stated consistently that the bomb ended the war, that it saved more lives than it took. He was not irrational in that belief. The debate among historians has never been fully resolved. But, and this is the forensic truth, the consistency of his position across 62 years tells a more complicated story than simple conviction. A man who is truly at peace with what he has done does not spend 62 years defending it. A man who has truly processed his role in the deaths of 80,000 people does not react to a museum exhibition about those deaths as an insult to himself. Paul Tibbets built something. He built it carefully. He built it over 6 decades. He called it conviction. The evidence suggests it may have been something else entirely. History presents Paul Tibbets with 2 options. Option A, hero. The man who ended World War II, who saved 1 million American lives, who did his duty precisely and without flinching, who should be honored. Option B, monster. The man who killed 80,000 civilians in a single morning, who felt no remorse, who should be condemned. But the primary sources, his own words, his own actions over 62 years, tell a third story that neither option is large enough to contain. Evidence 1. The cyanide capsules. Before the mission, Tibbets accepted 12 cyanide capsules, 1 for each crew member, in case of capture. He accepted them calmly. He put them in his flight suit pocket. He did not tell his crew he had them. This is not the action of a man who did not understand what he was carrying. This is the action of a man who understood completely, who understood that what he was doing was significant enough that capture would be worse than death and went anyway. Evidence 2. The interview at 83. A journalist visited Tibbets at 83 in his apartment in Columbus, a modest place on Broad Street. Tibbets said, "People thought I should be weeping for the rest of my life. They don't understand." He said, "I'll meet people, and when they find out who I am, they ask me, 'Why didn't you just tell them that you didn't want to do it?' That's when I really know that they don't understand. You didn't tell your superiors that you didn't want to do something." But then at the end of the interview, he said something that the journalist noted but most people who quote Tibbets never use. He said that he was not proud of the death and destruction at Hiroshima, not proud of the death and destruction. He distinguished between the mission, which he was proud of, and the outcome, which he was not proud of. That distinction, that specific distinction, is not the statement of a man who felt nothing. Evidence 3. The Headstone. Paul Tibbets died on November 1st, 2007, at his home in Columbus, Ohio. He was 92 years old, heart failure. He left instructions: no funeral, no headstone, no grave that could be marked or visited. His ashes scattered at sea. He gave a reason for this instruction. He said he feared that protesters would use a marked grave as a place of demonstration. That is a practical reason, a reasonable reason. But it is also the reason of a man who spent 62 years calibrating exactly how the world would respond to him, and who wanted, even in death, to control that response. A man completely at peace does not plan for the protests at his own grave. A man who felt nothing does not spend his final years ensuring that no one can demonstrate at the place where he is buried. Paul Tibbets understood exactly what he had done. He understood it from the moment he banked the Enola Gay at 31,000 feet and watched a city disappear beneath a cloud the color of boiling purple-gray smoke with a red core. He was not a monster. He was not a hero. He was a man who was asked to do something that no human being should be asked to do, and who did it with precision, and who then spent 62 years constructing the only architecture that allowed him to remain a functioning human being in the years that followed. He called that architecture conviction. Whether it was conviction or whether it was the most elaborate psychological defense mechanism any soldier ever constructed is the question that Paul Tibbets answered with his last instruction. No grave, no headstone, no place for anyone to stand and ask the question out loud. The debate about Hiroshima has never ended. Between 90,000 and 166,000 people died in Hiroshima. Of those, most were civilians. The Hibakusha, the survivors, formed one of the most documented survivor communities in human history. Their testimony is the reason the world understands what a nuclear weapon actually does to a human body. Setsuko Thurlow, a 13-year-old girl, 1 mile from the hypocenter, on August 6th, survived. She spent the rest of her life testifying before governments and institutions and accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 on behalf of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. She said, "Each person had a name. Each person was loved by someone. Tibbets and Thurlow never met. They lived in the same world for 62 years, the man who dropped it and the girl who survived it, and they never met." He died in Columbus, Ohio in 2007. She was still testifying in 2024. He left no grave. She left no silence. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Paul Tibbets flew over a T-shaped bridge in central Hiroshima and released a bomb and turned away. He was 29 years old. He lived for 62 more years after that morning. He ate breakfast. He went to Bob Evans. He tipped his waitress. He maintained his position. History will argue forever about whether he was right. He stopped arguing a long time before he died. He just stopped going to funerals, starting with his own. Subscribe to Fading Chronicles for true stories told completely from the very beginning to the very end.